Hello, how are you? Well, I was in California and now I'm in Arizona, but I'm still here to teach. So we're entering the unit on protozoans. And if you recall, protozoans are eukaryotes, but they're a little different from us because, we've got big bodies, they got little ones. So anyway, the protozoan parasite, or yeah, I guess can't really call it a plague, but it's very, very common. It is one of the most common gastrointestinal parasites in the United States. It goes by a couple of other names besides Giardiasis, which is Giardia enteritis, Lambliasis, and beaver fever. That's my favorite. This is what the little guy looks like. He looks pretty cute, but actually he's not when you have him. Uh, the image on the left is called a trophozoite, and the image on the right is called a cyst. And the cyst is similar to an egg. So that's the dormant stage that you would drink in water or elsewhere off of dirt or someplace else. The trophozoite is what attaches to your intestines. And those two little things that look like eyes, they're actually suction discs. So they suction onto your intestine, and that helps them to stay there. So Giardia lamblia goes by a couple other names, which is Giardia intestinalis and Giardia duodenalis. Sometimes scientists can't agree. I don't know why. So Giardia intestinalis, protozoan parasite. You can find it in humans, domestic animals, and even wild animals. In 1681, remember Antony von Leeuwenhoek? He actually saw Giardia in his own stool. Wow. So he had Giardia. It's like I said, it's really common, and it's been common for a long, long time. So this is what happens. Here is the cyst on the left, and it has two trophozoites because in the cyst, we can see there are four little eye-like things, four suction discs. So it splits and becomes two trophozoites, and then goes into your gut, makes more trophs. They attach, they release more cysts. Cysts go into your stool and then eventually into water or wherever your waste goes. So transmission is by cysts. You can see an actual image of, like this is from um, a stool sample, a stool smear that we would look at in the lab. And we identify it by direct examination. We see these cysts in the feces. We also sometimes see trophozoites in the stool if it has a very active case. You can also get it from, okay, so from, you get it, sorry, you can get it from direct transmission. So like if your child has it, you touch their bottom to help them wipe or something, and then you actually touch your mouth, then you can get it directly. You can also get it via fomites, contaminated food, also in contaminated water. And it survives very well in cool, moist conditions, and it can remain viable for quite a long time if it has those conditions. So up to 2 months at 50 degrees and up to a month at 70 degrees. And it can survive freezing. So if you have a little creek or a lake or something, pond that freezes over, those cysts can still stick around. It is susceptible to sunlight and drying out. So, if your pond does dry out, then it's likely that those cysts will dry out too. So as I mentioned, there are two life forms in the life cycle. There's the dormant cyst and the trophozoite. And this is another image of some cysts. This is again from an actual stool. And you can see there's a couple of cysts that we can see. And it has this hard shell exterior. And that's what helps it to survive in its water environment, and also helps it to survive in cold water, and to prevent it from drying out for a good period of time. It's in its dormant stage until it reaches an area of high pH, i.e., your tummy, and then the tummy helps it to your acid in your stomach, helps it break out of its cyst, and then the trophozoites go into your small intestine. So those two trophs from each cyst attach via their suction disc, which is called the adhesive ventral disc, if you want to use the proper scientific term, and they attach the mucus line in your small intestine. It can also pass into your colon, but it doesn't attach there. So if the cyst does get into your colon, it just travels through with the rest of your stool. It doesn't attach. It only attaches in the small intestine, and that's if the cyst has been kind of broken open by those stomach acids. So sadly, once you get it, they reproduce, and eventually your whole intestinal lining in your small intestine can be just covered with all of these attached trophozoites. Dog. So prevalence, it is the most common intestinal parasitic disease, more than 1 million people per year in the United States. 33% of the developing of the population in developing countries. So third world countries, up to a third of people just have it and carry it, and they live with it. It is a major cause of epidemic childhood diarrhea. So childhood, when you're a child, when you have diarrhea, you tend to lose a lot of fluids, as we saw with cholera. And so it can be serious in children, but it can be found in children in the US as well. And it's 15 to 20% in children younger than 10, not quite that high in the United States, but it can be high. So populations, who is affected? Well, children, travelers who go to some of these countries where it's highly prevalent, or if you are a hiker or backpacker or camper and you drink stream water, lake water, whatever, or even swim in areas like ponds, that kind of thing, then you can ingest these cysts, and then you will eventually have trophs in your gut. So in developed countries, as I mentioned, it's up to 33%. In underdeveloped countries, excuse me. In developed countries, it is about 2% and about 6 to 8% of children. And as I mentioned, up to 33% in the entire population in developing countries and 15% in children in developing countries. So here's just a schematic of what it does. You look down at the bottom, you see number 1, and you see the cyst, which is the infective stage. It gets onto food, water, whatever, your hands, and then that cyst gets ingested by you. It travels through your stomach where it breaks open. Then it goes into your small intestine, which is the area highlighted or colored blue. And then that's where it lives. And you release cysts while it's living and growing in your gut there. So humans are the principal reservoir of infections. So us, yuck, it has its highest incidence among children 1 to 9 years of age. And there have been many outbreaks of Giardiasis in childcare centers, or sometimes in institutional care settings, like orphanages, and even in adult populations, there can be, if someone gets it, then, it can spread pretty easily. Okay. So what is it? We've talked about this. It's a protozoan that lives in your gut, and it's an ancient eukaryote. So it's very, very, very old. And here's just another example. On the bottom left, we can see the cyst, and we can see the trophozoites that are exiting from that cyst. And then this is the small intestine on the right, where it just lives, travels along, excretes, it attaches at certain points, wherever it feels homey, and then it excretes cysts out of your stool. So risk factors, again, drinking water from lakes or streams, beavers, muskrats, and some domestic animals, dogs, cats, all of that, they can get Giardiasis. And beavers obviously live in the water, so that's why they call it beaver fever. They're probably the second most common host. Bears also can get it. So, where do beavers go to the bathroom? Obviously in the water. Bears don't necessarily, but bears do fish in the water. So, it is another opportunity for that to show up in the water. And if you eat raw or undercooked food that's been contaminated with the parasite, obviously, unwashed fruits and vegetables. I know I harp on this a lot, but, anything that's unwashed could have something on it, whether it's a bacteria, a fungus, a protozoan, whatever. It can have it. So again, person-to-person contact in daycare centers, long-term care homes, nursing homes, or if you have a family member, if your child comes home from daycare with a Giardia infection, then you are more at risk for getting it yourself. It's caused by the protozoan Giardia lamblia. Here's this guy who's going to get Giardia. You see the beaver swimming away in the background. Well, he just probably pooped in the water. And so this guy's filling up his water cup or his coffee mug, and he's going to have some coffee and Giardia for his morning. So it spreads easily from person to person. A tiny amount of stool is infectious. So you saw those images of the cysts in the stool. So those are at 100 power. So if you go down 100 times, then you can tell that's pretty darn small, like the tip of a pin. So a tiny amount of stool can have, like if you have, let's just say, a fingernail of stool, or even a half a fingernail of stool, it can have like 50, 100, even maybe 1,000 of those on it if it's highly infective. So anything that's contaminated can cause the illness if there are cysts on it. And travelers, of course, as I mentioned, are at risk for Giardia when they travel to especially third world type countries. So here's how the population in the United States is affected by Giardia. This is from 2011, so it's not a really current one. I'm sorry about that. I couldn't find anything really, really current, but it's probably fairly representative of what the population or the incidence is in the United States. And you can see in the upper north and just the entire upper portion of the United States where it's much cooler, that is where concentrations of Giardia occur. And a lot of these areas, Vermont, Maine, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Boise, Idaho, all of those areas in Oregon here have a lot of lakes, streams, rivers, etc. So there's a good chance that there's Giardia in them. And then coupled with the fact that there are cooler areas, so the cyst can survive longer, that's what we would expect. We would expect higher incidence in those areas. Interestingly enough, Florida has a fairly high incidence as well, but that is more, it's not due to, the cooler weather, but it just is due to a lot of animals and things being in the water and people being in the water as well. So it has a decent infection rate there. And California, most all of the areas have some Giardia. California has the Sierra Nevada, and of course, lots of lakes and streams and ponds and everything else there, creeks. So we do see it here in California fairly frequently. So here is Giardia by age. These are 3 different years, the colors of blue, but you can see pretty clearly that the ages of 1 to 4 are the most popular age group for infections, followed by 5 to 9-year-olds. And then we get up to the 30 to 54-year-olds, which are right in the center of that kind of bell curve. And those are people who are camping, hiking, traveling, etc. So that's obviously why those have a higher population. So what are the symptoms? You're gonna understand this. They're variable, but 50% are asymptomatic, which, we saw, or we just heard that Antony von Leeuwenhoek had Giardia. Well, it was likely asymptomatic. And a lot of people have a presentation that is asymptomatic. And some infections, you don't have very many, you have diarrhea, and, somehow those tropes just disassociate with you or detach, and you're self-limited, or maybe you have a strong antibody reaction that is able to get into your gut and take care of them. But 50% of patients do have symptoms. We'll talk about that in just a sec. But there are rare instances where people have upper GI symptoms, and that's nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and even fever, but that fever is quite rare. It's typically a common disease of your lower intestine, which means onset of diarrhea without blood or mucus. So, unlike cholera or some of the other diseases we've looked at, but you do have very foul smelling stools, a lot of gas and belching. You have abdominal pain. Malabsorption, if you have a lot of these in your gut, obviously you're going to have diarrhea, so you're not going to absorb all your nutrients, but also you're going to, a lot of the areas where your food can be absorbed is blocked. And so you may not gain weight, you may lose most of the nutrition that you ingest. The illness typically lasts for a week or two, but this too is highly variable. And the symptoms are usually chronic and intermittent. Like it might, you might have it for a couple of days and then it's better. And then it comes back 2 weeks later or a week later, and then you have it for another 4 or 5 days. And so it's just kind of recurring. So if you've been camping lately or this summer and you're experiencing symptoms like that, you might check on that. So as I said, most infections are self-limiting, but some people can get a very severe infection. And in this case, you have severe diarrhea, you have severe dehydration, and then your electrolytes, your salts, your sodium, potassium, chloride, CO2, all of that, they get out of whack. And then you need to be seen in the emergency department or be hospitalized. And chronic infection can occur. So this can last for months or years. As I mentioned, some people are asymptomatic. And unfortunately, for those who are immunodeficient, immuno-incompetent, I don't know, I have that there. Immunocompromised would be a better word there. Those people are more likely to get it. And also it may lead to malabsorption syndromes. I talked about that, the inability to absorb some of your food. Vitamin deficiencies, you might remember that E. coli helps to produce vitamins, vitamin K, vitamin B vitamins. So we are lacking in some of those. We might have severe weight loss, and then of course you might just feel it really bad because of all of those things going on, and it can be somewhat debilitating. It may contribute to decreased lifespan in immunodeficient individuals. So if you have a pretty bad Giardia infection and you're immunocompromised, you're not getting nutrition, you're not getting your nutrients. And so that can lead to kind of a downward spiral. So you might guess we diagnose it by looking at smears or stool samples in the laboratory. We usually see the cysts, but we can find motile trophs sometimes. They're fun to watch. And they're even fun to find. They're one of the easier parasites to find because they're so distinct as far as what they look like. So anyway, and there's also a test called the Giardia stool antigen test. And this is where a small amount of stool is taken and we have an antigen, so we can see an antibody antigen reaction. So what's the treatment? Well, anti-protozoan medications. Metronidazole is the most commonly used one in adults. It's not fun to take, but Giardia is worse. So most people take it and it's not a problem. Children have a harder time. So in that case, they divide it into 3 doses, 5 to 7 days apart, which seems to be effective as far as the kid treatment. And then, of course, rehydration for both adults and especially for children. Cure rates range from 60% to 100%. So it's not a real scary one. I mean, it's awful when you have it, but typically it is treatable. So also, as I mentioned, animals can get this. So dogs, cats, ruminants like, cows, sheep, goats, that kind of thing. Horses, pigs infrequently, but they too can get it, and other animals. And I mentioned wild animals, the beaver, there's our fun guy right there, and also bears. So beaver fever. Animal populations, the young animals are the most often affected. The incidence rate in puppies is 20 to 35%. Got a new puppy, wash your hands. And kittens, 10 to 15%. Foals, so young horses, 17 to 32%, calves up to 90% in calves, lambs 60 to 80%, and pigs 7 to 44%. None of this is life-threatening usually to animals. They will have diarrhea as well, and some of them will be asymptomatic, just like humans. As I mentioned, most animal affections are asymptomatic, but if they do have it, then they will have acute, chronic, or intermittent diarrhea. Their coat on their hair, for some reason, looks kind of yucky. They have a lot of gas, a lot of flatulence, and then they too have trouble gaining weight. And the animals might have light colored, very mucousy stool. And that's because they have undigested fats, which, the fat passes through because their intestine is not able to absorb and digest some of this material in the small intestine. How do we prevent it? Yes, wash your hands, wash your fruits, wash your vegetables, wash anything that, that you don't know if it's clean, because you don't know where it came from, and it could come from anywhere. Here's a couple of other places that might get it. As I mentioned, creeks and streams. There's a beaver upstream perhaps, and those trophs are and the cysts are just flowing downstream, right? And then not a real common one, but it is possible. Here's a water fountain. Now animals get in there and drink, or here's a dog who's been in there swimming or jumping around at least. So that too can be infected with Giardia. And you have some little babies putting their hands in, or you have your dog or your cat. Then the result is what you see down on the lower right, a little bit of diarrhea. So better to have clean water for everybody, cats, dogs, and everybody. And people, you're swimming in the American River. There are beavers in the American River. There are bears upstream. So if you're playing in it, just watch out. Try not to drink it. And yeah, you take your chances. So if you need to drink water, like you're out backpacking, there are good tools to use. This is a life straw. I've got 3 of these in my car, one in my car, one in my house, whatever, just in case, I ever have to drink yucky water. Or maybe it's not yucky. It may look perfectly clear, as this water does, looks very clear, but there can be Giardia floating around in there. So this is basically a filter. So you ingest, suck on the straw, and it filters out all of the Giardia protozoans and a great deal of bacteria, etc. And this is actually a life straw water bottle. So if you're up camping and you don't want to pack in a bunch of water, well, you can use this to filter your water as well. I'm not quite willing to take this much of a risk. Unless it was a real emergency, I'd probably bring in my own water, but you do what you want. So here's what I do. I bring in plenty of bottled water. That's the safest method. So, all right. Thanks for listening. See you next time.